I was underneath the trailer and I was hearing a vocalization. I didn't know what exactly the sound was. It wasn't natural that I ever heard before.
Deep within the Manistee National Forest, a terrifying encounter broke the stillness. On a quiet April evening in 2022, trucker Joe Barger came face to face with a creature with glowing amber eyes. What began as a routine delivery quickly escalated into a nightmare. Was it the legendary Michigan Dogman or something even more chilling? As Barger's story unfolds, the line between myth and reality blurs, leaving us questioning the boundaries of the supernatural. Stay tuned as we explore deeper into this haunting tale of fear and mystery. The bridges over Michigan's Manistee River have long been the focus of unsettling tales, with the reports of chilling tales of mysterious creatures emerging as far back as 1907. Farmers, fishermen, and travelers alike whispered about strange sightings, each eerily consistent in their details. These accounts, combined with Indigenous oral histories, paint a picture of something lurking just beyond the edges of understanding, a shadowy figure that defies conventional explanations. The earliest known report came from a farmer crossing the Manistee Bridge late one night in 907. As he approached a bridge, his horse became uncharacteristically restless, refusing to move forward. Assuming it was startled by an obstacle, the farmer investigated, only to witness something beyond comprehension. What appeared to be a fallen tree stood upright, revealing itself as a massive, fur-covered creature with glowing yellow eyes. His usually calm horse bolted in fear, almost tipping the cart Dot. The farmer, shaken and unable to explain what he saw, recounted the event to his neighbors, but many dismissed it as a made-up story or the result of a vivid imagination. This early account became the cornerstone of local lore. Its details, bipedal movement, glowing eyes, and an imposing presence, mirroring later reports and creating a foundation for what would follow. By the 1920s, truckers driving goods through the region reported strange happenings near the Manistee Bridges. The odd vocalizations heard at night were unlike any known animal, and brief sightings of a shadowy figure only added to the growing unease. One trucker's story stood out while repairing his vehicle near the bridge. He felt an overwhelming sensation of being watched. His flashlight beam caught a pair of glowing eyes in the darkness. Frozen in terror, he described the creature as tall and agile, disappearing into the forest with unnatural speed. These sightings echoed the farmer's account, reinforcing the belief that something unexplainable lurked in the area. The stories did not stop with truckers. In 1937, a fisherman casting his line beneath a bridge had a close encounter that solidified the legend. As dusk settled, he noticed movement above him. Looking up, he saw a creature silhouetted against the fading light standing upright on the bridge. Its glowing eyes seemed to watch him with a strange, unsettling intelligence. What set this encounter apart was the creature's descent into the water. Moving with eerie grace, it slipped into the river, disappearing beneath the surface. The fisherman ran away, unable to shake the image of the beast from his mind. Across these decades, the reports revealed strikingly consistent details. The similarities extended beyond individual encounters. Each witness, from the farmer to the truckers to the fishermen, described a bipedal figure with glowing eyes and an unsettling presence. These shared elements suggest more than coincidence, pointing to a recurring phenomenon that defied conventional explanation. Long before settlers began reporting encounters, Indigenous peoples in the area spoke of beings, eerily similar to the creature described in 20th century sightings, inhabiting the deep woods and waterways. Their oral histories referenced shadow walkers and forest guardians, entities described as protectors of the natural world but feared for their unpredictable nature. These stories often mentioned glowing eyes, powerful builds, and unearthly cries, details strikingly similar to the reports from settlers and travelers in the early 1900s. Such stories, often dismissed as folklore, seemed to carry an unnerving consistency that made them difficult to ignore. Each sighting left witnesses shaken with a shared sense of awe and terror, as though they had glimpsed a part of a world that was beyond logic. Over time, these tales transformed from mere campfire stories into a collective unease, weaving a web of fear and mystery that shadowed the region. It was this chilling legacy that framed the encounters of individuals like Joe Barger, whose story brought the legend to life in startling detail. Joe Barger, an experienced trucker, had spent years navigating Michigan's back roads, but nothing prepared him for the odd encounter on that fateful April night in 2022. With 6 years of Army experience and countless miles driven, Barger had always dismissed the strange tales of Manistee National Forest as mere folklore. However, the dense woods and unsettling stillness that night changed everything. As he drove his 18-wheeler through the winding roads, an unsettling unease settled in. Suddenly, a dark figure with glowing amber eyes emerged from the shadows, revealing a towering bipedal creature unlike anything he'd ever seen. In that moment, Barger knew he had encountered something truly otherworldly, forever altering his view of reality. Faced with fear, a nightmarish pursuit. In that frozen moment, the world around Joe Barger seemed to hold its breath. He stood transfixed, every nerve in his body screaming danger as he stared into the face of the impossible. Time slowed to a crawl, stretching out the seconds into an eternity of heart-pounding terror. It was as if the universe itself had paused, unable to look away from this meeting of two worlds that should never have collided. Barger could feel the weight of the creature's gaze upon him, a palpable force that rooted him to the spot and stole the air from his lungs. The creature looming before him was unlike anything Barger had ever seen in all his years of trucking across the country. It towered over him, its massive frame rippling with coiled muscle beneath a coat of shaggy dark fur. But it was the face that truly defied explanation, a twisted amalgamation of human and canine features with a long, powerful muzzle and eyes that glinted with a chilling intelligence. This was no mere animal, Barger realized with a sinking feeling in his gut. It was something else entirely, a being that seemed to have stepped out of the darkest corners of myth and legend. Barger's mind reeled, his thoughts scattering like leaves in a gale as he tried desperately to make sense of the sight before him. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to flee this nightmarish apparition and never look back. But his body remained rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a primal terror that reached down into the very core of his being. He opened his mouth to scream, to cry out for help, but no sound escaped his throat. It was as if the creature's gaze had stolen his voice, leaving him mute and powerless in the face of the unknown. The creature took a slow, deliberate step forward, its movements fluid and almost unnaturally graceful for its immense size. A low guttural growl rumbled from deep within its chest, a sound that sent icy shivers racing down Barger's spine and made every hair on his body stand on end. He could see the glint of razor-sharp teeth, the ripple of powerful jaws that looked capable of snapping bone like kindling. Every line of the creature's body spoke of raw, untamed power and a ferocity that could shred flesh and crush spirit with equal ease. It was a predator unlike any the natural world had ever seen. Panic surged through Barger's veins, a white-hot flood of adrenaline that jolted him out of his paralysis like a bolt of lightning. Fight or flight warred within him, the primal instinct to survive clashing with the gut-wrenching knowledge that he was hopelessly outmatched by this towering monstrosity. He stumbled backwards, his feet tangling in the undergrowth as he tried to put distance between himself and the creature. But even as he retreated, he couldn't tear his eyes away from its face, from those piercing, intelligent eyes that seemed to stare straight into his soul, seeing all his fears and secrets laid bare. The Michigan Dogman represents a tear in the fabric of the everyday world, a shift from the mundane into the realm of the uncanny and unexplained. As Barger fled from the creature that night, he embodied the age-old human instinct to escape the unknown, to return to the safe confines of the normal and the familiar. Adrenaline coursing through his veins, Barger turned and ran, his boots pounding against the forest floor as he plunged headlong into the darkness. Branches whipped at his face and eyes, but he barely felt their sting, his entire being focused on putting as much distance as possible between himself and the nightmare creature behind him. His breath came in ragged gasps, his heart hammering against his ribs as if it might burst. But even as his body pushed itself to the limit, his mind raced ahead, wondering if he would ever be able to outrun the memory of what he had seen. Behind him, Barger could hear the sound of the creature giving chase, its heavy footfalls shaking the earth like a dinosaur thundering through the trees. He thought he heard a snarl, a bone-chilling sound that rose above the cacophony of his own crashing passage. But he didn't dare look back, didn't dare take his eyes off the narrow path ahead. He knew that a single misstep, a single moment of hesitation, could mean the difference between a narrow escape and a gruesome end. Barger had survived wars. He had faced down threats, both human and mechanical, in his long years on the road, but nothing in his life had prepared him for the sheer, mind-bending terror of being pursued by something that shouldn't exist, something that defied every law of nature he had ever known. He could feel the weight of the creature's presence behind him, could sense its hunger, its implacable drive to catch its prey. And in that moment, Joe Barger knew with a certainty that went beyond mere thought that if it caught him, it would be the end. As he finally broke free of the tree line, stumbling onto the graveled expanse of the pull-off, Barger risked a single glance over his shoulder. But where the creature had been, he saw only darkness. It was as if the Michigan Dogman had vanished back into the shadows that had borne it, content for now to let its quarry escape. The sight should have brought relief, but instead Barger felt only a raw, gnawing fear. He could feel the creature's eyes on him still, feel its presence like ice in his veins. He knew with a chill certitude that this wouldn't be their last encounter. In the aftermath of his brush with the impossible, Joe Barger would struggle to reconcile his experience with the rational world he thought he knew. Like so many others who have glimpsed the boundaries of human understanding, he found himself adrift, torn between the undeniable reality of what he had seen and the insistence of a society that such things simply could not be. This internal conflict, the battle to make sense of the senseless, is a common thread in the stories of those who have encountered cryptids like the Michigan Dogman. It speaks to the power of these experiences to challenge our most fundamental assumptions about the world and our place within it. For Barger, as for so many others, the long journey back to a sense of normalcy would be a winding path, fraught with doubt, fear, and the ever-present specter of the unknown. Hands shaking, clothes torn and damp with sweat, Barger clambered back into his truck. But even as he locked the doors and started the engine, he knew that a part of him was still out there in the darkness. The adrenaline was gone now, replaced by a dull numbness, a sense of shock and disbelief that he had escaped with his life. He leaned his forehead against the steering wheel, trying to calm the wild racing of his heart, to stop the trembling that threatened to shake him apart. What had he seen? What had he survived? As the first rays of dawn began to paint the horizon, Barger began the long drive back to a world that made sense, but the eyes in the darkness would haunt him for a long time to come. Unveiling the shadows, the aftermath of an encounter. In the days following his terrifying encounter, Joe Barger found himself adrift in a sea of confusion and self-doubt. The experience had shaken him to his core, leaving him questioning the very fabric of his reality. He replayed the events of that fateful night in an endless loop, trying desperately to make sense of the impossible. But the harder he tried to rationalize what he had seen, the more the memory seemed to slip away, like a half-remembered nightmare that lingered on the edges of his consciousness. At first, Barger was reluctant to share his story with anyone, even those closest to him. He could imagine all too well the looks of skepticism and concern that would greet his tale, the raised eyebrows, the subtle shakes of the head, the whispered suggestions that perhaps he was working too hard, that the long hours on the road were finally catching up with him. In a world that demanded hard evidence and rational explanations, how could he expect anyone to believe that he had come face to face with a creature that belonged in the realm of myth and legend? But as the days turned into weeks, the weight of his secret began to take its toll. Barger's nights were haunted by vivid nightmares, visions of glowing eyes and snapping jaws that jolted him awake in a cold sweat. During the day, he found himself jumping at shadows and flinching at sudden noises, his nerves frayed to the breaking point by the constant sense of something watching, something waiting in the darkness. His appetite dwindled to nothing, and his work began to suffer as his mind wandered down twisted paths of speculation and fear. It was in the depths of this personal crisis that Barger finally reached out to an old friend, a fellow trucker named Mike who had always been there for him through thick and thin. Over a crackling phone line, Barger poured out his story in a shaking voice, describing in vivid detail the creature that had chased him through the Michigan night. He braced himself for the inevitable response, the gentle skepticism, the reassurances that it must have been a trick of the light or a product of his exhausted mind. But instead, after a long moment of heavy silence, Mike spoke 4 words that would change everything. "You're not the only one." As Barger listened in stunned silence, Mike began to recount a series of strange encounters and unsettling sightings that had been whispered about among the tight-knit community of long-haul truckers. Stories of ghostly figures glimpsed in the rearview mirror, of strange and unnatural creatures that seemed to melt into the shadows at the edge of the headlights' glow. For years, these tales had been dismissed as the products of overactive imaginations and too many hours spent alone on the road. But now, with Barger's own experience adding weight to the whispers, a chilling pattern began to emerge. A sense that there was something out there in the darkness, something ancient and unknowable that had been stalking the highways and byways of Michigan for longer than anyone cared to admit. In the weeks that followed, Barger found himself drawn deeper into a world he had never known existed. A hidden community of witnesses and believers who had been grappling with the reality of the Michigan Dogman for decades. Through hushed conversations and furtive exchanges of grainy photographs and hastily scribbled notes, he began to piece together a picture of a phenomenon that stretched back far beyond his own terrifying encounter. There were stories of Native American legends and pioneer tales, of strange tracks found in the snow and eerie howls echoing through the night. It was as if, by stumbling across the Dogman in that lonely forest clearing, Barger had inadvertently stepped into a secret history that had been unfolding in the shadows of the Michigan wilderness for generations. But even as he found solace in the knowledge that he was not alone in his experience, Barger couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over him like a shroud. He knew that the world he had once taken for granted, a world of rational explanations and solid, unshakable truths, had been forever altered by his encounter with the impossible. He had seen something that defied all logic and reason, something that challenged the very foundations of his understanding of reality. And now, as he delved deeper into the mystery that had consumed his life, he began to realize that his own story was just one small piece of a much larger and more terrifying puzzle. As word of Barger's encounter spread beyond the insular world of the trucking community, he found himself at the center of a growing storm of controversy and speculation. There were those who dismissed his story outright, chalking it up to the wild imaginings of a mind pushed to the brink by the isolation and monotony of life on the road. Others saw in his tale the seeds of a deeper and more unsettling truth, a glimpse into a world that existed just beyond the edges of our own. A realm of shadows and secrets where the old rules of reality no longer applied. In truck stops and diners, in the pages of local newspapers, and the buzzing forums of online message boards, the debate raged on, fueled by a heady mix of skepticism, fascination, and fear. Piecing together the legend, investigating the Michigan Dogman. As news of Joe Barger's encounter spread, a small but dedicated group of researchers and investigators began to take notice. They were the ones who had been tracking sightings of the Michigan Dogman for years, piecing together a patchwork of eyewitness accounts, historical records, and Indigenous folklore. To them, Barger's story was more than just a curiosity. It was a potential breakthrough in a case that had long been shrouded in mystery and speculation. Among the most prominent of these researchers was Linda S. Godfrey, a journalist and author who had been investigating reports of strange, wolf-like creatures in the Midwest for over 2 decades. When she heard about Barger's encounter, she knew she had to reach out to him directly. In a series of long, intimate conversations, Godfrey listened as Barger recounted every detail of his terrifying experience, from the moment he first laid eyes on the creature to the lingering trauma that haunted him long after the event. As Godfrey delved deeper into Barger's story, she began to uncover a network of other witnesses and researchers who had been grappling with the Michigan Dogman mystery for years. There were the amateur cryptozoologists who had been scouring the forests of the Manistee National Forest for signs of the creature's presence, the local historians who had uncovered tantalizing clues in centuries-old newspaper articles and folklore collections, and the Indigenous elders who spoke of ancient spirits and shapeshifters that had long stalked the wilderness of the Great Lakes region. Piecing together these disparate threads, Godfrey and her colleagues began to construct a more comprehensive picture of the Michigan Dogman phenomenon. They pored over historical documents and maps, interviewed dozens of eyewitnesses and local experts, and even mounted their own expeditions into the dense forests where the creature was said to roam. What emerged was a complex and often contradictory portrait of a legend that had deep roots in the region's history and culture. At the heart of this legend were the stories passed down by the indigenous tribes of the Great Lakes, who had long spoken of powerful and sometimes terrifying spirits that could take on the form of animals. The Ojibwe spoke of the Wendigo, a malevolent creature that was said to possess humans and drive them to madness and cannibalism. The Odawa told tales of the Mishibeishu, a monstrous water panther that could swallow canoes whole. And across the region there were whispers of the Dogman itself, a towering, wolf-like creature that walked upright like a human and had a taste for human flesh. But as Godfrey and her team dug deeper, they also encountered a wall of skepticism and dismissal from the mainstream scientific community. Many experts dismiss the Dogman as nothing more than a modern myth, a product of overactive imaginations and the human tendency to see patterns in the chaos of the natural world. Others pointed to the lack of physical evidence, no clear photographs, no DNA samples, no bodies or bones, as proof that the creature was nothing more than a figment of the collective imagination. They argued that eyewitness testimony was notoriously unreliable and that the stories of the Dogman could be easily explained by misidentifications of known animals, tricks of the light, or the effects of fear and adrenaline on the human mind. But for Godfrey and her fellow researchers, the sheer volume and consistency of the reports pointed to something more than just a myth or a mistake. They argued that the Dogman, like other cryptids such as Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, represented a challenge to the limits of scientific knowledge and the boundaries of the possible. In their view, the study of creatures like the Dogman was not just a matter of proving or disproving their existence, but of exploring the complex interplay between folklore, history, and the natural world. By investigating these legends with an open mind and a rigorous scientific approach, they hope to shed light on the enduring mysteries that have captivated the human imagination for centuries. As the investigation into the Michigan Dogman continued, Godfrey and her colleagues knew that they were just scratching the surface of a much larger and more complex phenomenon. But with each new lead and each new witness, they moved closer to unraveling the truth behind one of the most enduring and enigmatic legends of the Great Lakes region. As the investigation into the Michigan Dogman continues, one thing is certain: the legend of this mysterious creature will captivate our imaginations for generations to come. If you have a personal encounter to share or a piece of evidence to add, join the conversation in the comments below. Together, we can work to unravel the truth behind this enduring legend and shed new light on the mysteries that still lurk in the shadows of Michigan's wilderness.